You forgot the first rule of remakes, Jill. Don't fuck with the original.
Yesterday, we saw the premiere of From Dusk Till Dawn, the series, and you know what that means?
We're going to Mexico?
I've just come back from Mexico, actually.
Oh, well, la-di-da. Why wasn't I invited?
Actually, it means another episode of Don't F With the Original.
With Nicholas, I'm the beginning correspondent for Idiomatic.
And I'm Dimitri, editor-in-chief of Idiomatic.com and movie critic. Now, you guys know how it works. When we see a remake, a reboot, a revival, an adaptation into television of a movie, we check out said original movie, share our thoughts on it, and then build our expectations for the latest product in the franchise.
Yeah.
So, Dusk Till Dawn, 1996 movie written by Quentin Tarantino, directed by Robert Rodriguez. I think it's their first official collaboration.
Okay.
Which would lead to a whole bunch of really awful movies. I'm sorry, but like Grindhouse was not great.
Nice.
All right, so what we have here is sort of a two-part movie. It's 2 weeks ago we talked about Psycho and how it sort of veers into completely uncharted territory.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate that it became such a pop culture icon that it was spoiled for you.
Yeah.
And for me too, to be honest. And I feel the same way about From Dusk Till Dawn in the sense that I wish the commercials had not told me it was a vampire movie, because that would have come out of freaking nowhere and blew my mind.
Yes. However, I mean, we'll discuss this later, but I feel like Psycho, there's still kind of a train that kind of links everything, and it still kind of makes sense. Whereas, it seems like From Dusk Till Dawn, all of a sudden it's like vampires because zany,
Yeah. No, there's a thematic consistency in Psycho, and there's sort of, you get the sense of a master storyteller sort of navigating you through different genres, thoughts, and whatnot, and deliberately keeping you just one step behind at all times.
Yeah.
Whereas, definitely From Dusk Till Dawn feels like a 13-year-old wrote a screenplay and then shot it. Like, that's what it feels like. And wrote the first half before class and wrote the second half after class, and during class somebody mentioned the word vampire. That's what it feels like.
That's
having said that, I actually like the movie, spoil other people, but I do like the first half a lot more.
I like the second half more.
So that's going to make for an interesting review.
Yeah.
So what the movie's about, it follows the Gecko brothers. Seth Gecko, played by George Clooney in his first major role. This is essentially the movie that made him a star.
Really? It was before Batman?
Yeah, it was before Batman.
Okay.
It was before Batman.
Cool.
It's the first movie he played after ER.
All right.
And Richie Gecko, played by Quentin Tarantino, they are bank robbers, outlaws, who are trying to get to Mexico and kidnap a family in an RV to get to Mexico. And that family includes Harvey Keitel as Jacob, an ex-preacher who lost his faith after his wife died.
Yeah.
Juliette Lewis as Kate, a teenage daughter who's very teenagery, I guess. I mean, she doesn't actually have a character trait, which again sort of reinforces my idea that this was written by a 13-year-old boy.
Yeah.
And some random Asian kid that's Asian just so that Tarantino can score a couple of racial slurs where he knows they're racial slurs, so I'm not accusing him of being a racist, but I do find that he tends to exploit minorities so he can throw in that political incorrectness in there, and that character really felt like he was there just to get some jab jokes out there.
Yeah, then I guess, I thought it was good, before the jab jokes came, that's like, oh, when the son is Asian, and they mention, he doesn't look like your son, he looks Japanese, and the father's like, no, he looks Chinese, and then that's it, and then, okay, he just got the kid, and, okay, we just have to accept him as the kid, he's just Asian, okay, you adopted or whatever. Don't care. You just hired that actor just because.
That'd be nice, yeah.
But no, he got them there for the, little jokes there. And it's like, oh, come on. Seriously.
Yeah. And again, I'm sounding really bitchy. I want to stress again, I actually like the movie. What I like about the movie as it starts is this is essentially a thriller, a crime thriller from the point of view of the bad guys.
Yeah.
Seth and Richie Gecko are awful human beings.
Yeah.
Both of them. And the movie doesn't hide that, which is sort of great. Richie is a complete psycho and a rapist and a guy who keeps finding excuses to kill people for no reason. he's just an awful, awful, awful creature. And Seth is just the lesser of two evils, but he's no prize himself.
No, he's not.
And that makes for an interesting dynamic as bad guys. And so when they meet the family in the RV and you get that dynamic, it's interesting how you feel conflicted because you want them to follow Seth because he's the lesser of two evils and he might get them out alive. But it's not guaranteed either because you've seen him kill an awful lot of people for not the best reasons in the world.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of tension that comes from that. And you have a man who's lost his faith, who's lost his wife, who feels a little bit suicidal. That's Jacob, played by Harvey Keitel, who's usually the tough guy in most movies. He's usually a psychopath in a lot of movies.
Yeah.
Playing this man who might be a little bit suicidal and therefore sort of a wild card. And that makes for a really tense environment, and I like that.
I just felt that first half was full of stuff that was just put there to build up to the second half that kind of made no sense to me. Like, first of all, like you just mentioned, he lost his faith after his wife died. That happens all the time in movies. It's always lose the faith. I'm sure it's the opposite of what happens in real life. That you know, people usually use their faith to go through those hard times, and
that's true.
But in movies, and he's like, oh, I just lost my faith because that person died. And I was like, I'm so tired of this cliche all the time. It's like, it's always that excuse, lost their faith while somebody died. And then, of course, the family has to meet the criminals. So, we'll just stop at the hotel, even though we have this camper. It's like, and they give the flimsiest excuse on why they have to use the hotel, even though they have a camper. It's like, this is weak. And then, the third weakest reason, I've actually crossed the border to Mexico quite often. It's not guarded. You can cross. You can cross however you want, whenever you want.
But although the FBI and the U.S. Marshals know that that's where they're headed. Yeah. So it might be guarded just because they're headed.
But they were Mexican. They asked, like, they were kind of like trooping customs. Where are you going to Mexico and how many people? It was not like, we're looking for criminals. They were actually just doing the border cross thing, which those don't exist. You can cross through Mexico without even nobody blinking an eyelash. Okay. So it was just like this whole thing. It was just kind of, it seemed to me that just kind of an excuse to put them all together and get them to the vampires. And for me, that it just took like way too long. An hour of that. It's like, to me, for so long I've heard it was a vampire movie, and I was like, when are they going to get to the vampires? It was almost like my friend when he watched Birdemic, and it's like, when are the birds coming? To me, it was like, when are they getting to the vampire part? I thought it was like the meat and potatoes of the movie, and to me, it was just like, that first part with the criminals, which again, also a thing I don't like. Criminals is not, especially dangerous criminals. I don't mind goofy criminals like in Ocean's 11, where they're just kind of incompetent and silly.
Yeah, it's a pet peeve of yours. Movies about criminals, it's a pet peeve, but I would argue that the movie isn't about them. The movie is about the family having to deal with them. It's just that we were introduced to the bad guys very early on.
But yeah, it's like, again, the first part was like, when are the vampires going to kill people? That was what I was waiting for.
I mean, you bring up a couple of interesting points. The bit about the losing faith, you're right. You're absolutely right. That is sort of an overused cliche at this point, and it does feel a little bit lazy now that you mention it. I hadn't noticed when I was watching it, but you make a good point. I have no defense or counter argument to that. That's true. Yeah. And the motel thing, you're right as well. It's sort of a very hokey plot mechanics thing going on. That's true. So, two out of three, I completely agree with you. And the third one, I mean, I agree with the fact that the border thing is not well treated, but I can give it a pass.
You're right. If they had done the Marshall thing, we're looking for these guys, and we need to check everything, because we have these two dangerous criminals, but no, they were border guards. But yeah, if they had done Marshals, that's a good point. Perfectly fine with that then.
Yeah, and as far as it being like, well, get to the vampires already, I think that's a problem with the way the movie was promoted, is what it comes down to. If they hadn't said it's a vampire movie, then we would have been happy watching this.
Then we would have been wondering why the hell is it called From Dusk Till Dawn, though.
No, it just means all night long, so they're all night in their RV for all I know.
I guess, but yeah, most of it happened during the day at first, so it's like, that's weird. But yeah, you're right. All right.
bothered by that either. But what I find interesting is, of course, 2 weeks ago we reviewed Psycho, which also does the same thing. You knew that it was going to end up at Bates Motel, but we're still following Marianne's journey for, as well, an hour.
Yeah.
Out of, as well, an hour and 47 minutes, which is sort of an interesting parallel.
Interesting, huh?
Yeah. But, you know, you didn't get that same feeling.
Yeah, because I did enjoy her journey. You know?
Exactly.
She was it was a lot of fun, her being completely incompetent and stuff like that, whereas, you know, the whole criminal thing, I was like, I'm over this already.
But she is a criminal as well.
Yeah. She's a goofy, incompetent criminal, which are kind of like the ones I like, you know. Whereas them, they're like, oh, gee, cop killers and rapists. Yeah, I'm going to get behind those guys.
But again, I'm arguing that they're the bad guys,
not
the good guys. The movies seem to be set up for how is Jacob going to elude them, you know, and save his family when he's sort of suicidal himself. I think that's the dynamic they're setting. And for me, I was with that journey. And I think a lot of it is, you know, Quentin Tarantino, this is not his best screenplay by a long shot. Back when the movie came out, it was rumored that the first draft he had written when he was 13 years old.
That's why you keep mentioning the 13-year-old.
Yeah, that is. I was setting up this comment. And... yeah, I mean, like, and when you look back at some of the things you mentioned, you know, he doesn't know how the border works in Mexico. Well, you know, he's 13.
Good point.
The RV thing is ropey plot mechanics. Yeah, he's 13. I'm
not going to get a pass in the movie. Cause
no. I'm just describing what's going on in this movie. You know, the same thing with the cliches and also the characters as well. You know, he spends a lot of time writing these two crooks with these cool killer lines, which, you know, as a teenager you might relate to the killer because it makes you feel powerful, you know?
Yeah, I guess.
And that's what he's doing here. But what's interesting is what Robert Rodriguez adds to it, because a lot of Seth's speeches, you know, when he talks to the hostage, the bank hostage there.
Yeah.
And she's like, you know, you're going to follow 3 rules, you know, and if you don't, second rule, see rule number 1, and all of that stuff. You know, you've seen that in some of Tarantino's other screenplays being written much, much better than this. It feels like a first draft of those same speeches in the earlier movies, to be honest. But what makes it different is that Robert Rodriguez is directing and George Clooney are acting, and they take a completely different take than Tarantino ever would have. If you watch Pulp Fiction, if you watch Kill Bill, you'll see that they have a theatrical quality in the way they read those kinds of lines. It's sort of like, I'm bantering back and forth with you, I'm a witty person kind of thing going on, which is not a criticism, that's just how he does things.
That's how it is.
And Robert Rodriguez has George Clooney read them completely differently, where he is threatening. He is being monstrous by giving her that big speech. He's a little bit amused at himself, but we are not amused with him.
Yeah.
George Clooney is reading it as if he's trying to drill into her head that he's so callous about human life that he can make those little speeches, so don't fuck with the system. You know?
Yeah.
And that colors the entire screenplay differently. All of these choices that George Clooney makes, that Robert Rodriguez makes, to take these characters seriously and to actually explore the implications of what they are as characters in a real universe as opposed to a make-believe universe. At least for the first hour.
Yeah.
And that to me made it very tense. The entire journey in the RV, you were bored by it. I was on the edge of my seat because I was like, imagining what it must be for Jacob to be stuck with these monsters threatening my kids. This maniac looking at my daughter that way, and this other maniac going like, yeah, look at my brother. He's going to rape your daughter. You know that, right? You know that, right? Follow the system, you know? It's this to me made it like, oh my God, it looks like an impossible situation.
Okay.
And I wish the movie had gone on in that direction and then showed us how Jacob outsmarts these very dangerous and very smart as well. Like Seth is very smart.
Yeah. Characters
and gets his family out alive. And unfortunately, the movie goes into the second half, which I'll let you talk about it because that's the part you like more.
So yeah, this top of the bar called Titty Twister, and basically they're not welcome, so they basically beat up the bouncer at the door. And then they order some drink, and then the bouncer basically he wakes up and is like, "Hey, they started some crap," so they start shooting the bar up, and that's when a bunch of the people in the bar turn into vampires and attack them, and then we get a big giant fight with vampires, and then they figure out how we're going to survive until the day.
Yeah, but you like that.
Yeah, it was action. That was I was expecting. At first it was kind of like a bad episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which is fine. With better special effects. Sadly, eventually though, towards the end, it was getting okay, I get it. They're vampires. It's getting kind of long there, but at least action picked up, and it was no longer about those criminals. It was about how are we going to survive against those vampires, which was
but Seth is still a criminal trying to survive vampires.
Yeah, but he's no longer like criminal. I'm going to kill you. It's like okay, we need to work together to get through this. The element is not him being a criminal. It's no longer the focus of him getting to Mexico and avoiding the system. It's about surviving the night. And them working together. It's no longer a hostage thing.
Well, it's sort of like Pitch Black, where Seth Gecko goes from being the bad guy to being the hero. Yeah,
sort of. Yeah.
And that for me is a little bit problematic because Seth Gecko is such an awful human being as a character that I could never get behind rooting for him.
That's a problem I did have with the second half. It seems like all the characters forgot how they were in the first half, which I thought the first half was to, so long to, we get to see what those characters are, and, okay, so we know how they're going to be when they react to vampires. Like the little girl that was all scared and everything, all of a sudden at the end, she's kicking ass like Buffy. For like the first, 2/3 of the vampire fight, she's scared like she was, in accordance to how she was in the first half of the movie. And then at the end, when we're at the big final fight, she's like kicking ass and everything. It's like, no, there's no consistency here. That kind of annoyed me a little bit.
Yeah, and she's manipulating a weapon that's actually really hard to manipulate, the crossbow. This is one of those things that annoys me in movies. Guns and crossbows, people pick them up and then they become expert shooters. They're both actually really hard to manipulate. Yeah. The crossbow more so than the gun, in fact. So,
Yeah. So I was kind of disappointed with the last fight, honestly. But when the vampires are revealed and they fight, and then it's like they're thinking of what they're going to do, and then they barricade themselves in that room there. Yeah, I like there. Then the final fight there, I was kind of like face palming a lot watching this, and I couldn't believe this. It's like, okay, well, why establish characters take such hard time establishing your character how they are in the first hour to just throw them away in the last fight? It's ridiculous.
Yeah, well, that's, again, the rumor that Tarantino wrote this when he was 13 rings true again. It has that sort of ADD quality about it. It's just like, what the fuck just happened? You know what I mean? And it's also very puerile, you know what I mean? Like, you have Cheech Marin's long speech about pussy.
Yeah, that felt like it was written like by a 13-year-old.
It is. And, I mean, like, which is not to say it's not funny. It is funny, but... It's funny in that sort of like, I laugh because I remember the 12-year-old that would have laughed at this. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And for me, a lot of it does work, even though I don't like it as much. The same way as you like it, but a lot of it didn't work.
Yeah.
A lot of it did work, despite the fact that I was a little bit disappointed by that. The jokes work. Sex Pistol is a funny joke. He's played by Tom Savini, and that makes it funnier because Tom Savini did special effects for all the major movies, horror movies out there throughout the 70s and 80s and 90s.
Yeah.
So he's sort of like a really big presence in horror films. Having him play this dude who's sort of concocted a penis gun is sort of funny,
Yeah, okay, I can see that now.
You got Shaft as a guy who has a random Nam flashback at some point.
Yeah.
Which, again, that's funny.
He's so cool. He rips the vampire's heart from his chest, just by like that. Like, he's Shaft. I was like, wow, that was kind of funny, It's like, I like that part. And then they stab it with a pencil, It's like, it's kind of a stake, but it's already out of the chest. So sure, a pencil will do. It's all good. And that part I like. Those jokes, yeah, you're right.
Yeah, and I like that it poses a lot of questions that we've all had about vampires, such as the ripping the heart out thing. Is like, well, if you have to pierce a heart with wood, like, what happens if you tear away the heart? Is the vampire still alive? Apparently, yes.
Yeah,
You know?
Sure.
And that's funny. That's funny that they go there and explore that idea. It's funny that they actually take time to sort of comment on the fact that, like, well, normally a human being piercing their torso with a piece of wood would be really hard, but vampires, once they turn, they're super strong, but they're also made of jello. I don't get it. Like,
Yeah.
that's a funny joke. That's a funny thing to bring up,
Yeah.
The cross thing is also funny. It's like, we don't have any crosses, and the little the Scott Spencer, the adopted boy, goes like, cross is just two things put together in a cross shape.
Yeah, I know. Which is like super big problem with everything, and nobody ever thinks of that. It's just two pieces of wood that form an X. Come on.
So all of these cliches being brought up is actually very funny and very charming.
Yeah.
I think my favorite joke, and rightfully the last one that they have in this long conversation, is like, was there something about silver? It's like, no, werewolf. No, there's something about silver, which there is, by the way.
Yeah.
And like, it just gets cut off. It's like, do you have silver? No, then shut the fuck up.
I know. Any of you have silver? No. It's like, yeah, that was pretty funny.
So, like, the humor really works there, and that's what gets me through the second half, even though I feel like I've been robbed from an effective thriller, if you will.
Okay.
But like you said, it gets a bit much. You're like, okay, once they've had that conversation, then it feels like Tarantino went like, oh yeah, we got to wrap up this shit, and just wrote something to wrap it up. You know what I mean?
But I did actually. The special effects were nice though, because they're not CGI. They're very, very practical, and you can see it.
Only when they melt that it's CGI.
Oh, really?
In some cases.
Okay.
Sometimes it's practical. Sometimes it's not.
I could have seen when he was firing with the super soaker there. Yeah, I could see the melting. Yeah, that would have been pretty freaking hard to do. But I did like when one of them gets like holy water in half of them, and it's like he turns and half is melted. That looked pretty nice.
Yeah.
So at least it was watchable for the special effects. If you just, ignore that the characters are, all turned into Rambo, it's perfectly cool. See, special effects are pretty nice.
Yeah, I agree. It's I think it's the special effects, but it's also the energy. I think Robert Rodriguez again is the better half of the Tarantino Rodriguez duo in this movie specifically. I wouldn't say for any other movie, but for this movie specifically, I find his enthusiasm for those special effects, for those sort of complete gore excesses, sort of carries us through.
Yeah,
there's a nice rhythm to the movie. It moves along at a very, very quick pace of like one gore fantabulous craziness after the other, and just like move.
Yeah.
It doesn't try to sort of like look at our special gore. No, it's just like here's one, here's another.
Yeah, at a certain point, you don't even need to show the vampire. Just have the stabbing, have just liquid spew out, and we know what's happening. It's good enough, and I like that. It's like I don't need to see like them turning into dust every time. It's like no, just one stab. I get what you're doing. It's enough. Good for you.
Yeah, and I mean, like, and then he gets just crazy with, like, suddenly Los Lobos shows up, like, playing a human torso as a band behind, and it's like, what the fuck is going on there? But you know what? It's those elements that carry me through, where it's like, okay, this is just nuts.
Little nitpick at the end there. The sun comes from one direction, not all of them at once. It made for a nice scene, you put little holes in the wall, and you have rays of light coming from all which directions. That doesn't happen. But, it looked kind of cool, so I'll give it a pass. But still,
this is not a movie that you can really argue for its logic. You could, like the vampires are trying to get into the titty twister when they, and then eventually they throw somebody into the door, and that's how they get in. But it's sort of like there are full of bikes and trucks out there. The vampires could have just ridden one of them and opened the fucking door by doing that. Like it's
also why does a bar have a super soaker in the back as well?
No, that one that's explained actually. It's because they kill truckers and bikers, and then they steal their merchandise, and their merchandise was all in the back there.
So they keep the merchandise that can potentially kill them in the back. That's
a super soaker can't kill them unless a creature is there to
but they had
the water.
They had the crossbow thing though in the bag there as well. So
and my question is, it has a big cross, the box that has the crossbow, so it is a vampire hunter's weapon.
Yeah.
I believe actually it's a reference to the Hammer Dracula movies. Van Helsing, I think, had that weapon.
Well, they were vampire hunter kits back in the days that were just sold as novelty items, but they actually did have crossbows and holy water and stuff like that. So that could be that too,
But it has a big cross on it,
yeah.
And I keep asking myself, like, how did the vampires carry that in the back? Like,
Good point.
did he just like sort of like grab a broom and just like sort of sweep it towards the back of the room?
Yeah.
In which case, just set the thing on fire, dude. Like,
Exactly.
yeah, no. So overall, I liked it. I'm gonna give it a positive review. I do feel that this is a movie that's completely carried by Rodriguez's enthusiasm for this sort of material, because anybody else would have gotten this screenplay and it would have been a mess.
Yeah. It's like, wait, what? The movie has to stop all of a sudden and we turn into a different movie? This is weird. I don't know. I'm not a fan of the first half for music. I'm kind of biased against it, so I can't really say one way or the other. I enjoyed the vampire part, the second half. So, I mean, if you're a fan of Tarantino and the stuff he writes, like Pulp Fiction, you like that, you probably be a good fan of the first half. And the second half I found very enjoyable. So, combine the two. If you don't mind the jarring, like, left turn, you'll probably like that.
You might actually like the jarring left turn, because it is sort of like, wow, whoa. I personally don't feel it's as well executed as something like, we reviewed 2 weeks ago, Psycho, and other movies that have done that.
One that I think about when I think about like a left turn like that is Full Metal Jacket.
Yeah.
The first half, it's almost like it's hair from being a comedy while they're training, and so much weird stuff happening, and the worst thing they have to deal with is like the fat guy that can't stop eating. And all of a sudden the movie just stops, and you get thrown into this war thing with chaos and stuff like that, and you're like, whoa, what the hell happened? So I like that, but it still continues in, direct procession from training all the way to war, whereas,
Yeah, and it makes a statement.
Yeah.
That's the thing with both Full Metal Jacket and Psycho, is that it makes a statement. In the case of Full Metal Jacket, it makes a statement about how horrible war is.
Yeah. Yeah, that, training might be cute and all, but, war is serious, and it's not just, shooting at, targets that don't fire back. War is terrible, but yeah. And, this makes the statement that, vampires are zany, I guess.
Yeah, it does feel like the filmmakers just wanted, like, aha, we're gonna fuck with the audience. And you're like, okay. It's like, good for you. And unfortunately, it's how I feel about a lot of Tarantino's and Rodriguez's later work. Anybody who tells me that Tarantino is a genius for having made Pulp Fiction and Jackie Brown and all of these movies, I agree with you, but I am one of those people who feel that he's been coasting a little bit and been taking his creative direction in a direction that I wish he didn't. And I have the same feeling about Rodriguez, where I think he was one of the most promising directors of his time and sort of went into a direction that I wish he didn't. Where I feel a little bit where they're doing a lot of stuff because they can, instead of because they have something to say.
Okay.
And that twist falls into that category where they did it because they can, not because they had something to say.
That makes sense. Yeah.
But, well, whatever. Overall, it's still a positive review for me. You, not so much.
Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about the sequels. There have been 2 From Dusk Till Dawn sequels.
Okay.
From Dusk Till Dawn 2, Texas Blood Money.
Interesting.
Is a bank heist movie
that
turns into vampires showing up in the middle. So a little bit the same concept, if you will.
Wow.
And it's not directed by Robert Rodriguez. He's producer, but it's not directed by him. And it's it feels a little bit B-movie-ish. It feels a little bit straight to video-ish. I think it was, in fact.
Yeah, okay.
Which I find suits the material better.
Yes, I think so, honestly.
And so I definitely don't hate it, because it's sort of like, yeah, okay, like that's sort of what I want from a B movie. Maybe not necessarily a picture with that level of talent involved, but for a B movie with untested directors and screenwriters, yeah, okay.
Okay.
And then the third one, actually, I kind of like. It's a western. It takes place in the western era. So it's a prequel.
Okay, everybody loves prequels.
Yeah, with a cowboy pursuing bank robbers again, I think.
Wow.
And then ending up at the pyramid that will become the titty twister.
Okay.
And that one's fun too.
Interesting. And it also probably direct-to-video.
Yeah.
Is there like a jarring turn, like in the first one? They kind of respected that.
Yeah. All of them do that. All of them.
Interesting. Well, I guess it's not as jarring when you know. I guess the first one you're also supposed to know it's a vampire movie from the previews and stuff like that. So I guess you're not that surprised. Like I wasn't, but yeah, it's still like that 90-degree turn that you think weird. But if the sequels do that, that's good because they follow what in the first one.
Yeah, and truth be told, it feels more organic because you do expect it from the franchise at this point, but also they layer it a little bit better because the characters stay themselves.
Oh, that's good.
When there's that twist, so I find that they work better because they sort of aim lower.
Aim low.
It's a sort of material, like, again, if presuming Tarantino did write it when he was 13, it has all the maturity of a 13-year-old. So when you put the level of creativity and talent that Rodriguez and Tarantino put into it, as well as the money they put into it, it feels like wasted talent instead of talent enhancing a poor movie sometimes, depending on how you look at it. It's both,
Yeah, to the point.
But when there's untested talent dealing with that sort of material, you don't feel like, you could have done another movie at the level of Jackie Brown instead of this shit. You know what I mean? Like,
good point.
So, I find it's a franchise that works well for B movies, but the thing is, now we have a series.
Yeah.
Robert Rodriguez, new network, is doing a From Dusk Till Dawn TV series. And how do you pull off that turn in a serial?
Do you have only the last episodes dealing with vampires and the first 13 or no vampires, the last 13 vampires? That's weird.
That is weird, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like, how do you pull that off? I mean, from the trailers, it looks like they're sort of doing the idea of maybe a vampire conspiracy leading the Gecko brothers, because it is still the adventures of the Gecko brothers in the series.
Okay.
Recast, obviously. George Clooney's not coming back for that.
Ah.
And I don't know. It feels to me a little bit like, how do you pull off that turn in episodic form? How do you make a pilot that doesn't have vampires? Or do you introduce vampires early on and layer it subtly so that when it pops out it feels foreshadowed? But if you do that, are you missing the point of the twist? Like, it's actually an interesting idea to explore in a series. Like, I don't know how they're going to do that.
Well, they're going to have to fuck with the original and just go with the vampire thing and do, I don't want to say a Buffy, but kind of like having them dealing with vampires continuously. Kind of like, I'm afraid to say kind of like The Walking Dead, but with vampires,
Okay.
Is my guess, because I can't see them pulling off like twist after twist every episode. That'd be just crazy.
Yeah, in this episode, it starts out like CSI, ends with vampire.
Yeah.
In this episode, it starts out like Gilmore Girls, ends with vampires. Actually, you know what? I would watch that. It's like, you know what? I said that as a joke, but I would have watched that.
Yeah.
Next week, we will be reviewing the Muppets movie.
All right.
I'm actually really looking forward to checking that out.
I know.
Until then, if you want to write us, it's mail@idiomatic.com or post a comment at idiomatic.com. We're also on Facebook. We're also on Twitter @idiomatic. We're also on iTunes. If you could post a iTunes review, we would be very grateful, or like us on Facebook. It helps us continue to generate quality content for you guys. Otherwise, I will have no choice but to send Nick into Titty Twister and send him in the back room to get me a super soaker.
Do I get to keep the crossbow?
And that family includes Harvey Keitel as Jacob, an ex-preacher who lost his faith after his wife died.
Yeah.
Juliette Lewis as Kate, a teenage daughter who's very teenagery, I guess. I mean, like, she doesn't actually have a character trait, which again sort of reinforces my idea that this was written by a 13-year-old boy.
Yeah.
And some random Asian kid that's Asian just so that Tarantino can score a couple of racial slurs where he knows they're racial slurs, so I'm not accusing him of being a racist, but I do find that he tends to exploit minority, so he can throw in that political incorrectness in there, and that character really felt like he was there just to get some jab jokes out there.
Yeah, then I guess, I thought it was good, before the jab jokes came, that's like, oh, when the son is Asian, and they mention, he doesn't look like your son, he looks Japanese, and the father's like, no, he looks Chinese, and then that's it, and then, okay, he just got the kid, and, okay, we just have to accept him as the kid, he's just Asian, okay, you adopted or whatever, don't care, you just hired that actor just because.
That'd be nice, yeah.
But no, he got them there for
and whatnot, and deliberately keeping you just one step behind at all times.
Yeah.
Whereas, definitely From Dusk Till Dawn feels like a 13-year-old wrote a screenplay and then shot it. Like, that's what it feels like. And wrote the first half before class and wrote the second half after class, and during class somebody mentioned the word vampire. You know, that's what it feels like.
That's yeah.
Having said that, I actually like the movie. Spoiler alert, people, but I do like the first half a lot more.
I like the second half more.
So that's going to make for an interesting review.
Yeah.
So what the movie's about, it follows the Gecko brothers. Seth Gecko, played by George Clooney in his first major role. This is essentially the movie that made him a star.
Really? It was before Batman?
Yeah, it was before Batman.
Okay.
It was before Batman.
Cool.
It's the first movie he played after ER.
All right.
And Richie Gecko, played by Quentin Tarantino, they are bank robbers, outlaws, who are trying to get to Mexico and kidnap a family in an RV to get to Mexico.
You forgot the first rule of remakes, Jill. Don't fuck with the original.
Yesterday, we saw the premiere of From Dusk Till Dawn, the series, and you know what that means?
We're going to Mexico?
I've just come back from Mexico, actually.
Oh, well, la-di-da. Why wasn't I invited?
Actually, it means another episode of Don't F With the Original.
With Nicholas, I'm the beginning correspondent for Idiomatic.
And I'm Dimitri, editor-in-chief of Idiomatic.com and movie critic. Now, you guys know how it works. When we see a remake, a reboot, a revival, an adaptation into television of a movie, we check out said original movie, share our thoughts on it, and then build our expectations for the latest product in the franchise.
Yeah.
So, Dusk Till Dawn, 1996 movie written by Quentin Tarantino, directed by Robert Rodriguez. I think it's their first official collaboration.
Okay.
Which would lead to a whole bunch of really awful movies. I'm sorry, but Grindhouse was not great.
Nice.
All right, so what we have here is sort of a two-part movie. It's 2 weeks ago we talked about Psycho and how it sort of veers into completely uncharted territory.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate that it became such a pop culture icon that it was spoiled for you.
Yeah.
And for me too, to be honest. And I feel the same way about From Dusk Till Dawn in the sense that I wish the commercials had not told me it was a vampire movie, because that would have come out of freaking nowhere and blew my mind.
Yes. However, I mean, we'll discuss this later, but I feel like Psycho, there's still kind of a train that kind of links everything, and it still kind of makes sense. Whereas, it seems like From Dusk Till Dawn, all of a sudden it's like vampires because zany.
Yeah. No, there's a thematic consistency in Psycho, and there's sort of, you get the sense of a master storyteller sort of navigating you through different genres, thought.
Little jokes there, and it's like, oh, come on. Seriously.
Yeah. And again, I'm sounding really bitchy. I want to stress again, I actually like the movie. What I like about the movie as it starts is this is essentially a thriller, a crime thriller from the point of view of the bad guys.
Yeah.
Seth and Richie Gecko are awful human beings.
Yeah.
Both of them. And the movie doesn't hide that, which is sort of great. Richie is a complete psycho and a rapist and a guy who keeps finding excuses to kill people for no reason. He's just an awful, awful, awful creature. And Seth is just the lesser of two evils, but he's no prize himself.
No, he's not.
And that makes for an interesting dynamic as bad guys. And so when they meet the family in the RV and you get that dynamic, it's interesting how you feel conflicted because you want them to follow Seth because he's the lesser of two evils and he